right, there's a lot to command radios when you buy one on eBay. Now, most of the time, when you buy a radio on eBay, it's going to be open in the front like this. They've stolen out the module in the front, and there's no real reason why. It's just sometimes they try to sell it separately. All right, that's what you're going to get, okay? And you might have some wires hanging here. They give you a simulated wire, a couple wires hanging there. All right, that's what you're going to be faced with. Now, let's show you one that's finished. Okay, here's one of mine. Okay, they all go to ground. This pot, it can be 5K to 50K. Okay, and it goes between ground. One side of the pot goes to ground, and the wiper side goes to a wire, which goes up inside the radio. It's the gain control. Okay, but it has to be grounded. This plate gets grounded, so all three of these functions work off of ground. When you put the BFO up, it's disconnecting the BFO wire from ground and allowing it to oscillate. And the reason they do that is they want the BFO circuit to be warmed up. So when you do, in this case, it's right now, it would be still warming up, and then you pop it on, now it goes into oscillation. The same with the earphone jack. Now I use a miniature earphone jack. One side of this is grounded to the plate, and that's where the other two get connected for their ground. All right, I'm just explaining some of the stuff the other people don't tell you. Now, here's a plate I'm building, and it's got a volume control for a gain control, and it's got a miniature phone jack. Now you can also use a 1/4" phone jack. The reason I use it, it gives me a little more room for my knob, for my hand. See, when you plug it in, you plug your speaker in or headphones, you're kind of limited to space. So this gives me a little bit more room to get my hand in there. Okay, that's the only reason. You can use the 1/4", and you can find a lot of bodged ones. You'll get something like this. All right, now let me show you what this used to be. Okay, there's no coincidence that these two other holes are in the same spot. That's because there's a rivet out here, and there's a post that held a board back here. Okay, now normally I don't destroy these, but this one was already missing the circuit board. Let me show you what the circuit board looks like. Okay, this is a plug-in module. All right, it just has a gain control on it. Everything else is worked remotely when it's in the aircraft. There's another control panel that this radio plugs, and that's why I don't know if that's why it's command radio, but in other words, on most of the controls you'll just find a volume control or gain control, or a totally untouched one will look like this. That's it. Okay, there's a connector there, and this is for a certain model, and they all have part numbers, and you'll go crazy. The best way I'll tell you, and there's a cover that goes on it, and then this actually plugs into this thing. Okay, here's an outer cover. This sits in the radio. See those banana jacks back there? This is what will be missing when you get the radio. And now you can see how, if this had the cover on it, all right, these pieces, they can go together, and it plugs in. If I got it the right way, I might have it upside down. But anyway, that's original radio. When you get the radio, it's going to have any combination of what they give you, and you right off the bat, even if you have power supply and a speaker or headphones and an antenna, you have everything. You plug it in. You're going to be limited to what did they do to the front of the radio. And I've seen these things for sale separate. So someone's taking them off the radio, and they're either putting a gain control into it, or pulling one of these deals. So it's, you can't just say, well, this is how you're going to find it. No. Every one of these radios I've gotten has been in a different state of bodgedness, if that's a word. It's been bodged or touched by a person with big knuckles that didn't know what they were doing. And then I slowly go through it step by step and undo the wiring messes, the change the tube voltage, filament voltage from 28 to 12 or to 6. And you're in there, and that's really hard to do. I'm going to trust me on that. Turning the radio from a 12 volt filament setup back to 28. And the reason I do is that because my power supplies plug on the back of the radio, and they supply 28 volts or 24, and then they use a reverse transformer to get the high voltage. So I have a certain convention I'm using, because if I hand my radio to somebody, they can put the dynamotor right on the back and it'll work using a separate 24 to 28 volt power supply. My convention is make the radio original again. And then the person's like, well, how do I power it? You got a dynamotor? No, then you're going to need a power supply. And there's plenty of places that show you how to run a power supply into the back connector of the radio, or even onto the top with a dynamotor, the 3 pins. Okay. If you have an original radio, all you need, this is ground. This is filament over here. So from between ground and this is filament, and that would be 24 volts. It can take up to 28. AC or DC will light the tubes. Then from ground to this pin, you put your high voltage. Anywhere from 100 volts, actually 85 volts will make the radio work. 85 volts DC, all the way up to, some people use 300. All right? I just want to show you this because I went and looked at some of the other videos, and there's a lot they're leaving out. And if you get one of these radios, you're going to be lost. And you're going to dig your way through it. Now, in my case, I know how the radio works. I just look at the schematic. And yes, if you look at this, you say, why are those 2 wires back here? Well, I can put a dynamotor in here and run it with 24 volts DC. I think it's 2 amps. And the dynamotor will spin. It'll make this 24 volts DC or 28 volts DC will run the dynamotor. It also lights the filaments. Turns the dynamotor, which makes the high voltage. So, except for these 2 wires, this radio is original. Okay, I added them on there for test purposes. This is my test bed. Okay, this is where I test out a power supply. You know, and I put the old power supply on here. You drop it on there, and you pray you get on those pins the right way the first time. Okay, so now that's in there. Speaker's plugged in. Okay, so if we plug this in, I got a real mess going here. If you plug this in and turn this on, something should happen. And this has, right now, this has 24 volts AC coming out of this. So you got to be careful you don't bump into something that's metal. But she's firing up. All right, most of those noises are my computer behind me. I've told you that before. It's very hard for me to run a receiver with my computer on. But that's how nice this is, see? I can go between radio and radio. And this is my test bed. This is where I test tubes. And but this is a bodge job. And what was here originally in this location was one of these standoffs for this back connector. And when you look in your radio, if you look in and you see that, you look in and you see that, leave it alone. Leave that connector in there. Run your wire separately from your front panel. Leave it original as much as you can. It's sad what they do to these radios. It's real sad. Let me unplug this a second because I'm going to move this. I don't want to shock myself. Yeah, this is getting to be a mess, this workshop. But that's what I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you this front panel. And this pot, in this case, this one here, there's only 2 connections that go off to the connector. And one side goes to the gain control pin, and the other side goes to ground somewhere. And this pot works between ground. And the BFO, when it's grounded, what did I say before? I always forget this. When it's grounded, it's off. Okay. It's backwards. You figure if you ground it, but that's so the BFO stays warmed up. So when you switch it on, it doesn't drift. Okay, but it's no real big deal once you understand that all three controls. If you had a switch on here for BFO, all three controls, one side of the control goes to ground, one side of the headphone, the outer ring goes to ground, and they all get their ground when you mount it. Now you could run a separate ground, but run your switch and your pot to this grounded side of the terminal for the earphone and make a real nice setup. And then there'll only be 3 wires coming off this front panel. It would be the switch for the BFO, 1 wire, the gain control, 1 wire, and the headphone, 1 wire. Okay, I keep it very simple. But I went looking at other people's videos, and most of them got a really good command radio. They may have changed a couple capacitors, but basically they got a working unit when they got it. And you know, now I got more darts. You know, this front dart, this thing looks like something medieval. They're up in the front corners of the radio, and that's so when you put it in the rack system, it goes into a matching hole. It would be a triangular hole, or triangular cylindrical, or I can't say the word. But anyway, it goes in the hole, and then the back gets tightened up, and then the radio's in there. And the connector, the radio gets its power through the back of the rack. And but you can go in through here. All right, to power it. If you got a good working radio, all you need is ground and 28 volts AC or DC, and then ground, and then 100 volts DC. And plug in your speaker. Remember I told you speaker has to have a transformer in it, so it matches the impedance of the other side. They have it set up for headphone. So you take a filament transformer, put the low side of the filament transformer, whether it's 12.6 or 12.6 or 6.3, you put that to your speaker, and the other side is your high, and that comes out, goes to a terminal, goes to a phone jack, either quarter-inch or 1/8 inch, and you'll have a working set. And oh, this set is so well shielded, you might not know it's working unless you have an antenna on it. See, I have an antenna on it. If you don't have an antenna, it's dead quiet, and you'll think you got a bad one. But I just want to cover certain things I know aren't being covered by the other guys. The other guys are buying high-end radios, or they're getting a high-end radio, and they make it seem so simple. But if you buy on eBay, I've told you some of the problems that can happen, and I'm warning you. That's what I'm all about. I always say, watch out for this, watch out for that, because in life, it's the people that tell you to watch out for this and watch out for that that really help you out in life. All right, that's it.